In the civil rights movement's earliest days, Thurgood Marshall formed the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. For over 80 years, in courtrooms across the country, our attorneys have relentlessly fought for the rights we have today. Having those rights, keeping those rights that belong to every American takes work, commitment. It is indeed a calling. At a time when those rights are more threatened than ever, our work matters more than ever. That's why today, we are honored to introduce the very first Marshall-Motley Scholars. Named for our founder, Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, and the iconic litigator, Judge Constance Baker Motley. Scholars are from different backgrounds, yet share the same commitment to uphold, maintain, and protect our civil rights, to answer the call and bring an end to racial injustice.
Racial justice and choice-filled lives are not mutually exclusive.
As long as I live to fight for freedom.
Racial justice in education is when Black students are provided with equitable access to quality public education.
In every space, my mission is also to connect with people in ways that ultimately create more just and inclusive communities.
Since the age of 11, I have been committed to fighting for equality and justice in the South.
In this society, poverty should not be criminalized.
I am in the fight for racial justice on behalf of Black people.
I hope to be a leader that is a connector between coalitions and builds efficacy in communities by using the law to fuel material change that is larger than me or what any one individual can do.
I intend to offer my voice, visibility, and ensure the experiences of my community.
It's about changing the narrative and the dynamic and the systemic outlook for African Americans.
Good evening. How are you, Ashley?
Hi, doing well. How are you all?
Doing wonderful, doing wonderful.
Good to see you.
We really recognize how rigorous this process was. And it's one of the reasons why we wanted to just be able to talk to finalists personally. But I also wanted to reach out because I wanted to congratulate you on having been selected as a Marshall-Motley Scholar.
I'm not crying.
I'm not crying, you're crying. For having been selected as a Marshall-Motley Scholar.
Wait. I was sitting here, I was like, she gonna tell me I didn't get it. The way she was going, she did me. I was like,
Sherilyn Eiffel. Oh, hey there.
How you doing?
Hi, how are you? You can unmute.
Unmute yourself.
You can unmute yourself now.
Thank you. That's really awesome news, especially 2 days before my graduation.
Yes, I would think.
I can't wait to get to work for the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program, and it's just an honor to be a part of the inaugural cohort.
Congratulations, Marshall-Motley Scholars. Now, let's get to work.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program webinar. My name is Adria Kimbrough, and I am the Student Recruiting Manager for the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund's Marshall-Motley Scholars Program. We are absolutely delighted to have you here with us this evening as we prepare for the launch of our application for the 2022 year. We are excited that you are here, and we're going to share more information with you this evening about our application process. We're also going to be sure to leave some time at the end for question and answers. We want to make sure that you get your questions answered. You will see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box, and we ask that you put your questions there. So if you have questions as you move through this evening with us, please be sure to put those things in the Q&A box as opposed to the chat. That will help us keep track of your questions and make sure they get answered. And although we have those Q&A times at the end, we certainly welcome you to put your questions in that forum as we move throughout the evening, and we'll incorporate those questions as we go. I am delighted that you are here. I'm delighted that we got a chance to share that video again featuring our inaugural cohort of Marshall-Motley Scholars. And I'm even more delighted to have with me this evening, Mr. Gino Ray, who is the director of the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program. And together we're going to talk about the program as well as some information and some tips that I hope will be helpful for you, especially those of you who intend to apply for the program for this next cycle. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Gino, and we're going to continue our conversation.
Good evening, everyone. As Adria prepares the actual slides, I will just say once again, thank you for joining us. We are excited to have you. We have a very impressive first group of Marshall-Motley Scholars, and we are just as excited to set off on our journey to find the second cohort of Marshall-Motley Scholars. So what I want to do is just share a little bit about the program for those who may not be as familiar. And then Adria will, I'll talk more about the history of LDF and the history of the program and why we need this program. And then Adria will give you a bit more information about the actual program components and the application. And then at the end, we look forward to kind of talking through some scenarios of different types of things you may see in the application and ways you can make your application as strong as possible. We really do want to ensure that you have all that you need to be the most empowered applicant as possible. So we want you to give your best application to us, and that's what this webinar is to help you do, all right? So, all right, Adrian, we can get started. So a little about the Legal Defense Fund. We are the premier legal organization fighting for racial justice in the United States of America. The Legal Defense Fund is the country's first and foremost civil and human rights law firm. We were founded in 1940 under the leadership of Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American US Supreme Court Justice. And our mission, in essence, is to achieve racial justice, equality, and an inclusive society. And so LDF has been in this fight for a long time. We have a history of investing in the South. So the Mmsp is an expansion of that history, but our history goes back to the 1960s and 70s, where LDF began supporting and helping develop some of the nation's most legendary civil rights lawyers and leaders. So during the 60s and 70s, we invested in the creation of Black and interracial law firms in the South and supported some of the most celebrated civil rights lawyers in the region, including LDF Director Counsel and legendary North Carolina civil rights attorney Julius Chambers. So this program is an expansion of those efforts that we have had over time to ensure that we continue to grow the civil rights bar, particularly in the Southern United States. Next slide, Adrian. So why MMSP? None of us are strangers to this moment of racial reckoning that we're experiencing here in the United States. And we believe that our nation, this moment in our nation calls for a full complement of highly trained and dedicated civil rights attorneys. We want to build an army of sorts, if you will. Over the next 5 years, we will build a cohort of 50 civil rights lawyers who will explicitly be in the South, working on civil rights issues there. So we're looking for civil rights lawyers who are prepared to meet the challenges that we're confronting as a nation and to serve our communities with a spirit of excellence. So the MMSP is necessary right now to confront a lot of what we're seeing going on in our nation. Next slide, Adrian. And why in the South? Well, I'm glad you asked. So we're deepening our long-standing presence in the South. As I said before, we've been in the South since our inception, fighting cases for civil rights over the last 80 plus years. So we're deepening our long-standing presence in the South to help leverage the talent, passion, and commitment of a new cohort of civil rights attorneys. And the South is where most Black Americans still live. And we see even more recently, we're seeing a resurgence, kind of a reverse migration of sorts of people returning to the South in particular. And so as we look at how the nation is evolving, we realize that the work has been in the South and continues to be in the South, where the stronghold of racial justice issues continue to plague Black American citizens there.
1 second, Gino. Your volume is going in and out.
Is it? I'm so sorry.
It is. Yeah, you may want to hold your mic still. I think that's what's causing it.
I will do that. I will do that. So, Adria, can you take this next slide? Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So let's talk a little bit about the program. What is the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program? You know, this first bullet you'll see talks about it's a program that leaves nothing to chance. One of the things that I think we can all appreciate, whether you are a prospective applicant or someone who's in the law school admissions space, you know that law school is expensive. It's expensive, and the cost of law school is often a barrier to people pursuing their dreams for those who have aspirations to go into public interest or civil rights. So one of the intentions behind this program is to remove those barriers so those students, those prospective law school applicants who have a heart, who have a calling for civil rights work, the financial barrier can be removed. It is named, of course, for the civil rights legends Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley, and it includes scholarship support, but not just scholarships. It's more than a scholarship. It also includes internships, fellowships, trainings, and really just a development for people who are going to be going to law school into civil rights, and will follow them from their time as law students as they begin their careers as professionals.
Thanks, Adria. So some of the program benefits. One, you get a full law school scholarship. It's going to cover tuition, room, board, incidentals to alleviate that debt burden. A lot of students go to law school and they want to practice civil rights law, social justice, do social justice work and racial justice work, but they find that with the law school debt burden, they're more compelled to take big law jobs so that they can pay down the student loan debt. So this program actually helps alleviate the debt burden of the specific costs associated with law school, including miscellaneous expenses related to living and surviving as a law student. So that's a huge plus there. Summer internships are a guaranteed part of this program. And so all of the scholars will intern at LDF and or other national civil rights organizations who have offices in the South. And that's where they'll begin their training as civil rights lawyers early in their law school career, starting the first summer. So the first summer, the second summer, you will have internships. And then once you graduate, we will give you bar exam assistance and preparation assistance. And then you will have a 2-year postgraduate fellowship at a national, regional, or local civil rights organization with a racial justice law practice in the South. Once you finish that 2-year fellowship, you then have support from the program for 8 years as you begin your career as a civil rights attorney practicing in the South. And so that will be working in one of many different ways. It can be working for a national civil rights organization that has an office in the South. It could be working as an attorney who hangs their own shingle and decides to practice civil rights law in the South. It can be working for an established civil rights firm that's more locally based in the South. A lot of different opportunities and options will exist for the type of work that you'll be able to do. And then lastly, you'll get access to specialized training sponsored by LDF and the National Academy of Sciences. So training specifically around being a civil rights lawyer, but also on the intersection of law and STEM, technological developments, all of those things that are impacting the way that civil rights law is practiced in the United States.
Gino, your volume is still going in and out.
It's still going in and out? My apologies. Adria, I heard you clearly. Do you mind picking up here so I can work on my sound? Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So that's a lot that Gino just shared in terms of the benefits that Marshall-Motley scholars receive. But there is a commitment that is in exchange for those benefits. And essentially it means serving as a civil rights lawyer on behalf of Black communities in the South for an 8-year period. So altogether, when you think about the 3 years of law school, the 2-year fellowship, and then the 8 years of practice in the South, that is a total of 13 years. So certainly there are a lot of benefits to being a part of the program, but we also want to present to you and talk to you about the commitment that we will be looking for in exchange for all of the other benefits that students will receive. And you may be wondering what civil rights lawyering is, because it is indeed, when we think about civil rights, it can be very broad. And so we want to talk a little bit about what it means for the purposes of the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program. So there are 5 examples that are listed here just to give you a little bit more of a sense of what we're looking for. So certainly if you are practicing with a national, regional, or local civil rights organization, doing racial justice work. So we make that distinction because this program is designed to support individuals who want to do racial justice civil rights law. So you can do that within a civil rights organization. The second example we've given here is working for the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Obviously, we know that there are civil rights issues that come up with the federal government where lawyers for the DOJ will be engaging in a civil rights practice. So that's another example. Also, we see cases where there can be a civil rights practice on the state level. So perhaps if there's a local attorney general's office that may have a civil rights division, that would also meet our requirement for civil rights lawyering for the purpose of committing or fulfilling the commitment for the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program. There may also be individuals who want to hang up their own shingle and start their own practice. Certainly, Gino talked earlier about the prospect of hanging up your own shingle, gave the example of Julius Chambers, who did that in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if there are individuals who would like to start their civil rights practice on their own, hanging up their own shingle, that would also meet our requirement. And then finally, we have sort of a general category of law practice in pursuit of racial justice, because we know that every scenario cannot be anticipated. And certainly by the time some of these scholars graduate, the practice will have changed. The practice of law continues to change. And so we do want to leave some flexibility to be able to evaluate situations as they arise. So just know, certainly we're looking for people who are going to do civil rights lawyering, but also want to make some space to be able to evaluate those cases to ensure that individuals will be practicing racial justice, doing civil rights law in pursuit of racial justice. Now, the South. We talked about the fact that this program is indeed designed to populate and to create transformational change in the South. So that may mean different things to different people. For the purposes of the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program, there are 13 states that constitute the South. And you can see those states represented on the map here. And those are the states in which we would be looking for people to make a commitment. Those are also sort of the region of the country that we've been looking for a commitment, even in the application process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but want to just kind of paint this picture very clearly for you so you understand what it is and what we mean by the South. And I see Gino here, so I'm going to turn it back over to him for the next slide.
I'm going to try it without the headphones. If you all can't hear me, just chime in and we'll adjust again, all right? So to be eligible, I know a lot of people would have questions on what must I do to be eligible to participate in the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program? Well, you must hold a bachelor's degree from an accredited college or university by no later than September of 2021, be admitted to or be expect to be admitted to an ABA accredited law school as a, I'm sorry, that's September 2022. We'll update that. I don't want to cause any confusion. Be admitted to or expect to be admitted to an ABA accredited law school as a first-year law school, full-time law student, and then be a US citizen or a student with permanent resident status. Intend to pursue a career in civil rights law, and if awarded, you must work full-time in pursuit of racial justice in the Southern state for a period of 8 years, immediately following the fellowship portion of the Mmsp. And you must be able to describe in your application a sustained personal engagement in civil rights and racial justice. And we'll talk more about what that looks like at the end of the presentation. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to pass it back to Ms. Kimbrough. She's going to talk about what you can expect in the application and selection process, give you a little bit more about the timeline and the components of the actual application.
All right. We are going to talk about, I'm going to move this ahead just a bit, and I can tell you a little bit about the process. We will be opening the application on November the 1st. And once we do that, we will begin a review process immediately. The application will then close on February the 11th, 2022. So you've got quite a bit of time to talk about or to work on your application. And so, but the reason that we are here today is to be able to give you some additional information about how to approach the application. What I will do is I'm going to turn it over to Gino just a little bit more to talk about the some of the things that we're looking for from the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program applicants, and then I will pull up some additional slides to share more information with you about this process.
Okay, so what we're looking for in the Marshall-Motley Scholar is someone who, one, has a demonstrated commitment to racial justice and civil rights work. Two, has been doing that work on behalf of Black communities and who intends to continue doing that work on behalf of Black communities. And three, does that work in the South and can demonstrate, even if they're not currently in the South, can demonstrate strong commitments to, ties to, and intentions to remaining in the South for at least the first 10 years of their civil rights law practice. And so that's the core of who the Marshall-Motley Scholar is. And so if you're looking to ask yourself the question, am I going to be a good fit for this program? I want you to take a step back and to think, and I challenge every applicant to really think about this. Yes, this is an amazing opportunity, but what you're not looking for here is just an opportunity for the sake of an opportunity. This is a 13-year commitment. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that I like to drill home about the program, is that you are becoming a part of a great legacy, but not only that, you're also becoming a part of a family of people who hold a set of values. The values of the program are excellence, compassion, and community. And so you're becoming a part of a community that holds those values very dearly, and it becomes like a family. And that 13-year commitment, I often kind of paint a picture of who people might be. You know, many of the scholars will come into the program as fresh out of undergrad. They will go through the process of going to 3 years of law school. They will have a 2-year fellowship. During this time, they may fall in love. They may get married. They may buy their first house. They may have their first child. They may move out of, have to be moved away for family-related issues. All kinds of things can happen during this 13 years, right? What we're concerned about is finding people who are committed for the long haul. The 13-year commitment is really a big thing. So in looking at your application, be clear that you are communicating very clearly not only your passion for the work and your desire to do the work, but as some people would say, show us your receipts, right? So don't just tell us about the passion that you have for it. Show us how you have demonstrated through action, connection to certain types of organizations, certain types of internship opportunities that you have taken, certain types of coursework that you have been enrolled in, that has really propelled and fueled your interest in civil rights law and in racial justice issues. So think about how you're going to frame that in your application. Think about how you're going to show us who you are on those big 3 ticket items: your commitment to racial justice, not just social justice more broadly, but specifically racial justice, particularly as it pertains to Black people in America. And then also your commitment to civil rights law and your interest in practicing that civil rights law, and your commitment to working on behalf of Black people, and your commitment to working in the South. It's going to be very, very strategic for you to think about how to weave together your application to truly highlight all of your experiences that can really show and support your candidacy under those particular areas. And I see Adria is back and has a selection process ready to roll. So I'm going to let her tell you a bit deeper dive into what you can expect over the next few months. You're muted. I'm sorry, Adrian.
Thank you. How many times have we heard that in the last year? You are muted. Thank you for that. I wanted to share with you so that you could actually see some of the dates that we talked about earlier. Again, with the application opening on November the 1st, with it closing on February the 11th. By March, we would have selected the finalists, and we will do interviews for those finalists. And with this timeline, we plan to announce our second and next cohort of Marshall-Motley Scholars in April. So here's a little bit more information about the components of the application. So there's several things that you'll want to have prepared. The first is the personal statement. Now, this is not an unfamiliar thing for you, for those people who are applying to law school. So in many ways, it will be similar to personal statements that you use for your law school applications that highlight your background, your experiences, your talents, your interests. But one thing we will point out, you want to make sure that you make the distinction between applying for the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program and applying for law school. So you may take that personal statement and tailor it a bit for the purposes of our program. As you will hear as we continue our conversation, the things that we are concerned about are a commitment to racial justice on behalf of Black communities in the South. So if you can take your personal statement and tie those elements in, that's going to make for a stronger application versus just taking the law school application personal statement that you already have prepared and just sharing that with us. So you want to be intentional about what it is that you submit. The second piece is an essay. So in addition to the personal statement, we're also asking for an essay. And that essay, 1,500 words maximum, that's the same for the personal statement. And in it, we will give you prompts and ask essentially about your commitment to working for racial justice on behalf of Black people in the South. As Gino already mentioned, this program involves a 13-year commitment. So we're looking for people who have already made those kinds of commitments, and we're hopeful that you'll be able to communicate that in the context of your essay. So next you'll see on the screen to the far right is the transcript and test score. We do not need an official transcript. An unofficial transcript will do. Our application is online, and again, it will open on November the 1st, which is Monday. But we ask that you would redact any sort of personal identifying information. Obviously, we will be working to keep your information confidential, but we don't need the Social Security, the date of birth, and those things we have to be even more careful about. So the easiest way to do that is for you to redact that information. So we ask that you do that. And then with that is the test score. So we know that there's some applicants who are going to be taking the Lsat or have already taken the Lsat. There are others who are going to be using a GRE score, and that's also okay. We will accept an Lsat or a GRE score. And you can pull that information from LSAC. You can pull a score report, or if you're not able to do that, if you can have a screenshot, but that also shows your name, but we want some documentation of your Lsat score. Now, what I wanna make sure and mention is that there is no minimum GPA. There's no minimum Lsat score for the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program. I want to say that one more time. There's no minimum GPA. There's no minimum Lsat score for the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program. This information is for our administrative purposes because we want to ensure that we have applicants who are going to be viable for law school. And that is the only way in which it will be used. It will not be used as a metrics. We are very sensitive to the ways in which sometimes the transcript, the undergraduate scores, GPA and test scores can be misused. And so we want to give you an assurance that it will be only used for administrative purposes, and it will not be used to make decisions about ultimately who is selected. Here are the additional application materials. So we also ask for recommendations, 3 letters of recommendations recommendation to be exact. Similar for those of you who are applying for law school and who've had to upload the names and the contact information for your recommenders, our application will ask you to do the very same. So you will have to submit those names, email addresses, and then we will generate a notification that will go to the recommender. And then those individuals will be asked to upload a letter of recommendation on your behalf. We ask that at least one of those letters come from a professor. And the exception, though, that we make is if you have been out of undergraduate for 5 years or more, then we certainly understand the challenges that may come from being able to get a letter from a professor when you are no longer physically there or engaged with the campus. But other than that, we will be looking for applicants to have at least 1 letter from a professor, and then the other 2 letters, you can select the people who you will think would make the strongest application for you. Additionally, we ask for a resume. This is going to be very similar to what you will use for law school. And the one caveat we'll ask for the resume is that we ask for you to redact your name. Our review and selection process is anonymous. So for our team of reviewers, they will not see your name. And we do that to protect the integrity of the process. So we simply, again, just ask that you remove your name for the resume, but the rest of it should be able to work as is. All right, we're getting to the final corner here of our slide into the requirements. We ask for a 3-minute video. And it doesn't have to be 3 minutes, it's 3-minute max. And in that video, we ask for you to respond to the question, how are you currently living the life of a Marshall-Motley Scholar? This is one of the most insightful parts and most impactful parts of the application. Every other aspect here is going to be written. The video submission gives us an opportunity to get even more of an essence of who you are and to hear you in your own words verbally to be able to make the case about how you're currently living the life of a Marshall-Motley Scholar in terms of your commitment to racial justice on behalf of Black communities in the South. And last but not least, we have just one really short answer question, and then there's one that's optional. And the short answer question asks about the 13-year commitment. We know that it is a significant commitment. And so in that short answer question, we're asking you why you think you're ready to make a commitment for 13 years at this point in your life. And that helps us be able to determine and discern whether this is going to be a program that will be a good fit for you. And then finally, we ask an open-ended optional question about any additional information. So that sums up the components of the application. I'm hopeful that it's instructive for you. And certainly we're going to give some illustrations as we go, and hopefully it will illuminate these points and help you have some insight about the components of the application. All right. I'm going to ask Gino to return to join me for this next conversation.
Well, I apologize. I've worked on signals and sound as best I can, so I'm gonna hope that you can understand me and hear me for the rest of the day.
I think that is really good. I can hear you now. So awesome. I think we're in good shape on sound. All right, so I'm going to share my screen once again, and we can talk a little bit about who is the Marshall-Motley Scholar. All right. So there are a few things, and you probably now are hearing some recurring themes here. One of the things that we're looking for is an unwavering commitment to racial justice and pursuing a career as a civil rights attorney, to work that intentionally improves the lives of Black people, and to working in the South. And you may be thinking, what is an unwavering commitment? And those kinds of things can be, you know, subjective to in terms of forecasting. But, you know, I've heard the saying, the past is prologue. And one of the things we look for is what has your record. I heard Gino refer to receipts. So we'll be looking at the things that you've done, the commitments that you've already made, which give us an indication that this is not something that is a fly by night. This is not something that you're new to, but this is a commitment that you've already made and that it will be something that will continue. We also are looking for some history, and this is, you know, pretty much kind of ties into what we just talked about, but a history that has a clear and significant impact in the areas that are important for our program: racial justice, Black communities, and communities in the South. So a clear and significant impact. And so, you know, there can be a continuum. There may be someone who has maybe done one activity, one event, and then there are people who have been involved in a more significant and impactful way. And so the Marshall-Motley Scholar is going to be a candidate who has that clear and significant impact. And then someone who's been a leader in these areas, someone who has led, created, or played a substantial role in work that improves the lives of Black people in the South. And so, because Marshall-Motley Scholars are going to be leaders. They are already leaders. And as they continue, they matriculate through this program and do work in the South, they will be leaders in the South. And so we're looking for people who already have demonstrated that kind of leadership. All right, so now here comes the fun part. We've got a few examples that we hope will illustrate some of the things that we're looking for. And once we go through those, we're gonna open it up for questions. I see there are quite a few questions already. So we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. All right, Gino, Ray, applicant A. So let's talk about applicant A. Yes. Applicant A, born and raised in the great state of Alabama, but relocated shortly thereafter to California. This is someone who has led campus efforts around racial justice issues on their campus. Also, during their time as a student, they've done some research on the impact of race in the K-12 setting. And then they went ahead and continued that interest through TFA, Teach for America, where they started with TFA and they are still teaching. They're teaching in Oakland, California. Tell me, what do you think about applicant A?
Well, and I will say before I kind of say anything about any of these applicants, in case anyone's wondering, I wouldn't say that any of these examples are per se the Marshall-Motley Scholar, but what I think they do is that they give you good illustrations of the type of things, and they may resonate with you. You may see yourself in some of these characteristics and things of that sort. But what I'll try to do with each applicant is point out some of the things I think are, you know, pretty solid, and some of the things that could create tension in their application that they may want to give some attention to and try to resolve in some way strategically in their application. Again, I want you to be as prepared as possible. So I see born in Alabama, but relocated to California. It gives me the connection to the South. There's a tie there. I think that the applicant would want to take some time to kind of bridge the geographical gap between Alabama and California. Are they rooted in California now? Has California become the center of their life? Are they looking to move back to the South? What's motivating them to move back to the South? That kind of thing. They led campus efforts to address racial justice issues. Yeah, and so, of course, you all can't see all the details of what this campus effort would be, but I see that they were actively involved and they took a leadership opportunity that presented itself in real time. So they were not only active in the researching, which was, you know, next conducting research and things of that sort, but they were also active, found ways to be engaged in real-time issues that were happening that affected them in their most immediate community on the campus. And so that speaks a lot about their commitment to those issues at home. As the old saying goes, charity starts at home and spreads abroad. And so I like to, my great grandmother would say, it's a sorry frog that won't croak in his own pond. And so I like to see that these people have advocated for themselves in the spaces that they found themselves. That speaks a lot about their ability to advocate on behalf of other people. And so they conducted research on the impact of race in K-12. And so I'm seeing the consistency kind of interest in racial justice issues there, the K through 12 education piece, educational equity, access, that kind of thing. It brings in those types of issues. They further demonstrated that commitment by going to Teach for America and being an alumni. And then they further solidify that interest in kind of the educational space by continuing to teach. Now, that's a great thing. That's a big plus. One of the things that you may strategically want to address, and that is where the shift is happening from being an educator on the front lines of the classroom to now wanting to transition to the front lines as a lawyer. This was somewhat my story. I was an educator coming from it, and I had to realize what was it in the education space and the other kind of broken systems that I had experienced that was driving me to want to go to law school, to have this degree to do what? You know, and so being able to articulate how this strong interest that you've shown in this application that leads you to a path that looks like you're an educator, where's the pivot coming from, and why, and what's motivating you to make that kind of pivot to civil rights law?
Thank you for that. So making those connections, the Southern connections, tightening those things in the application, and then explaining the shift from education to law. That's all great. Great advice. Let's move on to Applicant B. Applicant B is a lifelong Michigan resident. I want to put my hand up. I'm not from Michigan, but folks from Michigan always put their hand up and point to where they're from. So this person is from Michigan. Now, interestingly, they led the campus chapter of the NAACP at a university in Mississippi. So they're from Michigan, but they made the choice to go to college in Mississippi. Looks like they've returned to Michigan. So they started an organization, came back home, an organization that supports and mentors Black teenagers that are facing disciplinary issues in school. Applicant B has also served as a legislative aide for a state representative in their hometown. Tell me your thoughts, Mr. Ray, about Applicant B.
Yes, well, Applicant B once again presents some wonderful, some wonderful things in the resume and in their applicant profile that would be appealing, right, to as a Marshall-Motley scholar. I see that they've done some work around race issues. They've been working with the NAACP at a university in Mississippi. So that indicates a connection to the South. Now I see they're a lifelong resident of Michigan. And so that, once again, is out of the region of the South. However, if you understand the migration patterns and things of that sort, it's highly likely if they went to school in Mississippi that there might be family connections, ties of that sort. Now, in the profile that they provided, they haven't necessarily spoken to that. So one thing I might counsel this student or this applicant to do is to speak to those things to help draw out and tease out the connection between the South, because they went back to Michigan and started an organization. And from my perspective, that speaks to rooting, foundation, maybe thinking of longer term, impact in the Michigan area. I would want to see somewhere in the application where they speak to helping me understand that shift from such a substantial role of starting an organization in Michigan to now wanting to be a civil rights lawyer in the South. They served as a legislative aide for a state representative. Great work. I'd want to know what issues they worked on with that state representative. Did they ask to be involved in any specific types of assignments if they weren't automatically kind of assigned to something? What type of work product that they produce there would be things that interest me. But one of the things I'd also want them to do to round out their profile here is to maybe help me understand that they are not on a political path in some ways, because some of the ideas that you see here and the interests that they've been involved in could speak that they have political interests and some other types of interests. So I'd want the applicant to kind of help resolve the tension between the geographic piece. I'd want you to kind of speak more to your motivation for now leaving an organization that you started in Michigan to want to be a civil rights lawyer practicing in the South. And I want you to speak to your specific commitment to civil rights law and be able to articulate how you see that as being slightly different than pursuing a political path that will work on similar types of issues.
All right, that's good stuff. So making those connections again, and I think that's good advice for any applicant, looking at your own individual profile and finding connection points to the criteria of the program. So that's great advice. All right, Applicant C. So applicant C is from Pennsylvania, lifelong, born and raised in Pennsylvania, but has ties to South Carolina, has family there, spent summers there growing up. Applicant C has been very active in the global human rights space. I'm very involved with global human rights organizations, interned with Human Rights Campaign in DC, and also has coursework. So while they were in college, they did very extensive coursework in racial and social justice. Tell me your thoughts about applicant C.
So some good points here, that they have connections to the South. They are involved in social justice work more broadly. I think what I want to see from this applicant is them bringing that down specifically into the racial justice funnel and speaking explicitly to their experience working in that space. And now, if this person just doesn't have that experience because they've been working in the global human rights space, they've been working on other types of broader social justice issues, then what that person would do in their application is help us to understand, once again, the pivot. Right? Were you working on specific types of issues in the human rights space that led you to an awakening within the specific, more narrow civil rights space? Is there a connection? Is there intersectionality that you're looking for here, that you're looking to pursue? I want to see more about the racial justice piece, and I want to see more about the connections and the ties to the South and what's driving them to want to do the work in the South, and an understanding that they understand the work that needs to be done in the South. So it's a good applicant, has some great things, but once again, you want to bring those experiences that don't sit squarely in the racial justice space. You want to make it your responsibility to put it there so we can see how it's related to the work that you're saying that you want to do long-term in the racial justice civil rights space.
All right, so that's our suggestion for applicant C. We have one last applicant for discussion, and that's applicant D. Applicant D is a Georgia peach, lifelong resident of Georgia, has impactful lived experience with issues of race. So it's basically what it sounds like, who's had a lot of experiences just personally with the issue of race. But may not have as much experience in terms of active, in terms of their resume, if you will. But they are committed to the pursuit of racial justice efforts in the future. They're passionate, they're informed by their lived experiences, and they're committed to pursue racial justice in the future. And as sort of evidence of that, they have mentioned that they volunteered with one of the local community organizations with an event to bring awareness to the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, which of course, who was killed in Georgia. Mr. Ray, tell me your thoughts about applicant D.
Applicant D has a lot of potential, and I think it would be incumbent upon applicant D to kind of show us, we got the Southern connection. They're very clear that they're a lifelong resident of the state of Georgia. I don't know if y'all saw me doing my little Georgia peach dance when she said peach. I'm a Georgia boy. And so they have impactful lived experiences with issues of race, which I don't discount. And so it would be the applicant's responsibility to help me understand how those lived experiences rise to the level of demonstrated commitment and navigating those lived experiences and issues with race. They commit to pursue racial justice efforts in the future, but maybe they haven't done a lot of work right now. I think that this kind of speaks in some ways to those applicants who may be non-traditional students, who may be coming without, maybe they got a degree later on, they were working full time and doing other things, and they didn't have as much time to maybe be active on campus, or maybe it's a student who went to undergrad straight out of high school, but had to work full time in order to pay bills and didn't have time to be involved in campus organizations and take on internships because they were working to keep the lights on. And that's okay. But it would be the responsibility of the applicant to share with us how that commitment to pursue racial justice efforts in the future is a certain and sure commitment. And then volunteering with local community organization, great. That's a great activity. but it doesn't rise to the level of a demonstrated commitment in the sense of the longevity, working with a particular issue, the impact of working with a particular issue. Volunteering at a local community organization is always good to show some interest, but it doesn't necessarily show demonstrated commitment. So I think this applicant would have some work to do to create an application that helps me understand that they are in fact the Marshall-Motley Scholar and that it does rise to the level of demonstrated commitment to racial justice issues, working on behalf of Black communities, and with them being in the South. I think the South is probably the easiest thing for this person to demonstrate here. They have no intentions of being anywhere else, but the other 2 points, they'd have to do some work to really kind of firm that up and show me why they are the Marshall-Motley Scholar in those 2 areas.
All right, so I'm hopeful that those examples were helpful, helped illustrate some of the things that we are indeed looking for in the Marshall-Motley Scholar. And I'm hopeful that you also have gotten your questions in. So if you've got questions, it's not too late to go to the Q&A. That's where we'll be looking for questions. So if you did put a question in the chat, I would encourage you to direct that question to the Q&A because we want to make sure we get your question answered. So I'm going to start with letters of recommendation. There were a couple of questions, Gino, about letters of recommendation. So one of the first questions is about whether the application or whether the applicant needs to have a tailored letter of recommendation for the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program, or can this person simply upload the letters of recommendation that they've already uploaded for LSAC?
Let me give you all my best advice. This is a substantial scholarship. If you want to get this, it's more than a scholarship. You know, it's a 13-year investment in you, and so you can imagine how substantial that investment is going to be. If your letter of recommendation for law school was not tailored to the same types of questions and information and things that we're looking for in our application, I would say it would not be your strongest letter of recommendation. Now, I understand, based on the challenges I had navigating the whole law school application process, that sometimes when you get that recommender on the hook, you got them on the hook for one good letter. That's all you get. They ain't making no revisions. They're not giving you 3-4 versions from 5 different schools, and they're not doing that. So what some of you will have to have the letter that they use. Now, the good thing is when they complete their recommendation portion, we also have some specific criteria that we will ask them to rate you on. So please do not feel that if you can't get them to customize it, we have a mechanism for them to give us some customized response to you as an applicant in the context of the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program. But your strongest, most strategic letter of recommendation, and I'll say this for your essays as well, and your strongest, most strategic essays are always, even in the law school, I'm gonna put on my law school admissions cap real quick, even to the law schools you're applying for, you always wanna give people the honor of letting them know why you specifically are interested in becoming a part of their community. So if you can do your research and find a way to tailor your essays and find a way to motivate your recommenders, I will tell you a quick 10 to 15 minute coffee chat with a potential recommender can change the entire nature of your letter of recommendation, particularly if you can come to the table with some ideas about some of the things that they can say and highlight for you and help them shape it. So take the time to try to customize. I think it'll be your strongest application.
All right. There was another letter or a question about the letter of recommendation. I'm going to take a stab at it. And the question was about being anonymous with letters of recommendation and if the letters already have the names. And what I will say, and feel free to add on, Gino, is that we'll be sure to give the recommenders instructions about our process, and we'll guide them to also be anonymous in what they share with us. But feel free, Gina, if there are any additional things you want to add to that to make sure we thoroughly answer that question.
No, I think that's good. And I think worst case scenario, we do a review of all the applications and for those types of checks as well. And if we need to redact anything to keep all of that information out, we will take the strays and be able to redact that information as well.
All right. There's a question about demonstrated commitment. And it's a great question because I think it's one that people are thinking about. So someone has asked, what does that mean? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? How does one know that they have indeed met that threshold for demonstrated commitment?
And I think that I put that responsibility and onus back on the applicant. You have to find a way in your application to take your set of experiences. Your set of experiences is just what it is. And if you believe that you are the Marshall-Motley Scholar, you have to find a way to frame your experiences in a compelling way, in a convincing way that would help a committee of people who are reviewing it, because it's not necessarily finite. I think it changes from person to person. We have applicants who may have not been able to, or not, engaged in any substantial way that they consider to be substantial. But I thought that their engagement was very, very, very powerful, that they had been involved in their church's social justice ministry since the time that they were young. And that church did a lot of very localized work. And that was the most that they have done, but that's very substantial in my eyes, And so for some people, it is the fact that they, once they got to college, they really started getting involved in social justice issues. Maybe they were from a much more conservative community. And once they got to college in a more liberal environment, they started exploring a bit more on their own. And so I think it really is a responsibility of each unique applicant to help weave their story together in a way that is compelling and that will leave the reader with a clear knowing that you've had a demonstrated commitment to these types of issues.
All right. So folks are focusing in on this criteria. So we have another question around this commitment to the South. So there are actually a couple of questions. One, and I'll sort of tie them together. One is, what if I don't have any ties to the South? What do I do? And then there was another question, a second question that asked, what if my intention is to attend law school in the South? Is that something that might help bolster an applicant's case, if you will, in terms of making that connection to the South? So if you can speak to that.
Yeah, and I'll give the classic law school answer. It depends, right? It really does, because and I know that's probably frustrating, but I really want to kind of help you understand how everyone's story will be slightly different. Right? But the people who tell their stories in the most compelling ways are the people who will be noticed, right? If you have no ties to the South and you tell me that you want to work in the South and that you are clearly committed to that, then give me evidence of how you have done. What have you done? What steps have you already taken before this scholarship appeared? What places were you looking at to live in? What organizations, what schools were you looking at attending? If you had the opportunity to attend university in the South, but you're in the North, then help me understand why you took, the opportunity to go to undergrad in the North versus the South. It could be financial. There could be a lot of different reasons why you didn't make it to the South or why you haven't gotten there yet. For many people, they're just getting started in life. I came from Cairo, Georgia. I didn't have money to move or go much far away from home. And so I understand those types of things. You could be landlocked where you're at in your experience right now and just haven't had the opportunity. You have to tell me that. I don't know it. I can't assume it by reading your application. You have to find a compelling way to tell me your story so that I hear and that I'm clear that even if you haven't had the opportunity to be in the South, you intend to be there and that you've probably already taken some steps. And that's how you can demonstrate at least an interest, a clear interest in being in the South, is being able to talk about what steps you've taken, what research you've done, what are your specific interests. The people who really want to be somewhere, they've thought it through a little bit. And so you can give me a little bit clearer roadmap of what you envision life for you being like in the South, even though you haven't been there yet. And for those people who are attending a law school in the South, it could have some value. I'm going to be most interested in, and when I say I speak as the selection committee, right? There's a whole bunch of people around me with that I. But we're going to be looking for the person who says that I'm going to the university in the South or law school in the South. We're going to be looking for the evidence of what you intend to do beyond law school, and have you thought that through? Or have you just kind of looked at law schools in the South for, you know, a variety of reasons? It could be scholarship motivations. It could be cheaper cost of attendance. It could be, you know, a lot of different reasons why you want to be in the South. It could be weather. You know, I know people who go to law school in Florida just because they can get to the beach. And so I don't know. We don't know until you tell us. So if you're going to law school in the South, that could be an indicator of your demonstrated commitment to wanting to remain in the South. But that is the part you have to be clear about how you articulate. What are your intentions for remaining in the South? And how can we be sure, and that certainty is on you to bolster and provide for us in the way you tell your story. But how can we be more certain that you're committed to going to law school in the South and remaining in the South for at least the first 10 years of your career?
We are right at the 8 o'clock point, but I'm going to just squeeze in one last question because we have not talked about it yet, and that's the fellowship. There are several questions in the Q&A box about the fellowships. So if you can talk a little bit about, number one, do the scholars have a choice? That's a question that has come up. And then also a little bit more about the kinds of things that would qualify for the fellowship and the practice. So there was one question specifically around policy work, and would that be something that would meet the requirement for the Marshall-Motley Scholars Program? And we'll end on that question.
I'll take the last question first, because I do want to make sure that I say very clearly, you will be doing civil rights lawyering. And so understanding what civil rights lawyers are doing in the practice of civil rights. And so thinking about civil rights litigation, firms that are working 75% or more of the cases that they're taking are civil rights cases, pursuing racial justice on behalf of Black people. And you'll be in the South. So that's really the kind of work that you're thinking about people who are arguing cases. You know, you're getting trained by the Legal Defense Fund. Right? These are the baddest I would argue some of the baddest lawyers in the nation, period. But definitely some of the baddest civil rights lawyers you're going to come in contact with. These are people who are litigating, who are taking a very complex issue and working daily through the court system to try to chisel away at that. And so you are applying to become a fellow in a program that is producing an army of civil rights lawyers. So think about that very clearly, that you may not have as much space in this program if you want to do policy work and government work. And, you know, it's a very small area of government type of lawyering that you can be involved in this program. And even with those opportunities, those are not the preferred opportunities, right? We really are looking for people who have a passion and want to be on the front lines fighting civil rights cases from a litigation and lawyering perspective. So Adrian, what was the second part of that real quick?
About the choice of like, do the scholars?
Yes, so there is choice on both sides. We don't guarantee that you'll get any particular choice, but what we do is we kind of provide the scholars an opportunity from the list of partners that we provide, to kind of designate who their top choices are, and then we give the partners an opportunity to interview scholars based on their resume and other job application materials as well. So hopefully the goal is between the organizations choosing which scholars they interview and the scholars choosing which organizations they're interested in, we find matches among their choices there. So. All right, well, that's all I have. Thank you all so much. I'm sorry to hold you 3 minutes longer. We'll answer additional questions and direct you to the website for anything else. And I'll pass it back to Adrian.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Gino, for the questions and the answers. Thank you all for attending. We realized there were some questions that we did not get an opportunity to answer directly. So please reach out to us via email. We just put our email address in the chat. Don't hesitate. If you did not get your question answered, please be sure to take a look there. There's also an application guide on our website. It's also been shared in the chat. It may be able to answer a lot of the questions that you have, but also don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are again delighted that you are here. We're excited about Monday, and we hope that many of you we will see in the application cycle this year. Again, thank you for being with us, and we wish you a wonderful evening.